When an ancestor is born in 1789, finding their parents isn't easy. Carding Jackson has been a mystery for me for decades. But the records were there and I was able to solve it, and I want to help you break through your brick walls too. I'm Amy with Ancestry Amy, and I'm here to help you take your genealogy to the next level and have some fun while we're doing it. So today I'm going to tell you the story of how I discovered the parents of Carding Jackson. I'm going to tell you the mistakes that I made, and I'm going to tell you the step-by-step processes that I went through to discover the ancestors of somebody born in 1789. Hang on tight because this is going to be a lot of fun. It's a great story, but I'm also going to take you methodically through the steps that you need to understand in order to do research in this time period and handle those brick walls that you have in your family tree. Now, if you've ever wanted to solve a mystery like this, you're in the right place because this is a really interesting brick wall. Why is it difficult during this time period? You'd think with the name Carding, I would have some success. Well, Carding is an unusual name, but Jackson sure isn't. And there's a lot of Jacksons to be found. And that's where a lot of people make mistakes, right? They grab the wrong person. Records in the 1700s, early 1800s are a little bit more sparse. They are out there, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to find the records that you're looking for to prove a relationship. It's certainly much more difficult than it is a bit later in time where we're dealing with our more recent ancestors. So Carding was born on October 19th, 1789, according to a family history that I have that was given to me by my grandmother, who said that the writing was her grandmother's hand. So Carding is my fourth great-grandfather. In these family notes, it gave his birth date, and it said that he was born in Vermont on the east side of the Green Mountains. Well, the Green Mountains run the entire distance of Vermont. So it helps, but it doesn't, right? It gave me information about his wife and his other family members, and his wife was Elizabeth Betsy Gibbs, and her father was reportedly a Revolutionary War soldier. But I really didn't have much on either one of them beyond that point. Carding died in 1854 in Chicago, Illinois. And according to that family document, Betsy was born in 1793 and died in 1866, also in Chicago. And then they had children Caroline, William, Cyrus, Mary Woods Jackson, Betsy Elizabeth Jackson, named after her mom, Frances Louisa Jackson, who I descend from, and Persis B. Jackson. There was a beautiful tribute posted in the Chicago Tribune that said that Carding was one of the oldest citizens, but that he was known to comparatively few. But the article also talked about the fact that he was involved in the Masonic Lodge, actually organizing one of the lodges and eventually becoming the Deputy Grand Master of the state of Illinois. So I knew he was a Mason. I knew he was born in Vermont, supposedly, and died in Chicago, Illinois. And I did a lot of research to find out some of that middle information. But let me take you through this process step by step. The first thing you need to do when you want to break down a brick wall is to take it into smaller, manageable bites. Because if we try to do too much and our focus isn't narrow enough, then that can be more difficult. And for some people, it's kind of intuitive. For other people, they kind of need to write it out. But the reason why you want to have a good research goal is you don't want to be going off onto tangents, which is so tempting to do when you're wanting to do family history work, let's be honest. Now, I wanted to know who his parents were, but I needed to know more about him because although sometimes brick walls are a lack of records, more often than not, there are records, but there isn't evidence connecting them and helping you to identify the information that you're seeking. So my first bite was to search census records. Now, I didn't find a Carding in Vermont censuses at all, but I found one in Broome County, New York in 1820 and 1830. And then I found Carding in Chicago in 1840 and 1850. And the 1850 census named family members that I knew of, so I knew that was my right guy. But I didn't have any records of a Carding in Vermont. And I wasn't sure if this Carding was the same one that was in New York. Now, I didn't have an overlap in years, which FYI, when you adopt a census record into a program like Ancestry, it may lead you down the wrong path and not help you recognize that there were actually two guys and they were in the same year in two different places. You need to be kind of a skeptic. You need to go through these records, looking for problems, looking for conflicting evidence, because that's where, especially when you're researching in this time period, that you make your mistakes. So you need to kind of be half empty glass person in this instance, because you're just looking for anything that is telling you something different, and then you've got to resolve it. But I didn't find another Carding Jackson either in New York, while the one that I had was in Chicago, or in Chicago when I had the guy in New York. So that was a good sign, right? I didn't have duplicates in different places. That helped. But I didn't know for sure if that was my guy. So I had to take a deeper dive. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and I had to be a little bit pessimistic. Now remember, when I started doing this genealogy research decades ago, we didn't have anything like full-text searching for sure. We didn't even have computers and the ability to find records on the internet. We were going to libraries and looking through microfilm, so everything took a lot of time. And as things are changing, one, records are easier to obtain, and more records are coming online all the time. So it's great. But when I started this process, I was manually looking through deed books, trying to figure out if the Carding Jackson from Vermont went to New York and from New York went to Chicago. But initially, I didn't find anything that corresponded to those individuals through my initial researches. I had to dive deeper into those deeds. And finally, I found a deed in 1828 that said Carding Jackson and his wife Betsy sold some property in Broome County, New York. Yay! Now, Elizabeth is a common name, right? Or Betsy is a common name. So there was a chance this wasn't my Carding and Betsy, but that was definitely something that was promising. Then the best record came forward. In a mortgage deed, I found a Carding Jackson mortgaged some land to an individual, and then he released that individual from the mortgage in 1839. And as you can see from this document, it's wonderful because it says, I, Carding Jackson, late of Lisle, Broome County in the state of New York, now of the town of Chicago in the county of Cook and in the state of Illinois, hereby blah, 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 blah. This record was my definitive proof that my Carding had been in New York, that was my guy, before he went to Chicago. Yay, I've built more on the life of Carding. Now, on the Bureau of Land Management site, I found that Carding had obtained 160 acres in Chicago from the United States government. So that was fantastic. And hold your thought there, because there's going to be more to that story in just a minute. But the most important thing that I want to point out in this initial research is look at deeds. I cannot tell you how often I have solved some of these brick walls for myself or for other clients by doing deed research. And now that we have full text searching, it's so much easier. In a short period of time after full text searching came out, I came up with this long listing of events. And I'd like you to notice that I've put it in a timeline. I put it in a timeline so that I could make sure that everything is lining up. Because if I'm finding somebody in a different location, that's a warning flag that something may be wrong. And remember, we're being a little bit pessimistic as we're doing this type of research, because we're looking for anything that's contrary to what we are finding thus far, or especially what we're maybe believing when we are believing something too early, because it happens all the time. So I had now checked out Carding and census records. I knew that I had my Carding in 1820, 1830, 1840, and 1850 before he died. But I didn't have him in earlier records. He would have been in 1820, he would have been a little over 20 years old. So it's not unreasonable that in the earlier census records, he was living with his parents. And in this time period, those census records don't give the names of everybody in the households. So you have to play a little bit differently. You have to investigate things in a different fashion. But I still didn't know where in Vermont Carding could have lived. And like I said before, there were lots of different cities, there were lots of different counties that he could have lived in, and I just didn't know. So at this point, my next step, even my next sub-goal within my major goal of trying to find Carding's parents, was to exhaustively look at other records that I could find in the two locations where I had him. I was looking in Chicago, Cook County, Illinois, and I was looking in Lisle, Broome County, New York. And I was looking at court records, like I showed in that timeline. I was looking at anything that I could find that would give me more information. I was looking at county histories and city or township histories. I was looking at newspapers. I was looking at anything that I could find that might give me some insight into where carding may have come from. Because I could take a pot shot and look all over Vermont and try to find my Jacksons in there, but I'm going to be more successful if I go from what I know and work back into what I don't know. Now, I found carding in a book, Chicago and Its Distinguished Citizens by David Ward Wood, and in this it said that he was born in New York. So now I have conflicting information. I have my family records that say he's born in Vermont. I have this record that said he was born in New York, but the 1850 census did ask where he was from, and it did say he was born in Vermont. So now I have two things that are saying Vermont, one that's saying New York. That's easily reconciled because in a book like that, if he had lived in New York for quite a period before coming to Chicago, that's not completely unreasonable. But I definitely needed to find more records to kind of find out more about carding and where he might have been in Vermont, if he was even in Vermont. I hope you're catching on that you don't want to jump to conclusions too quickly. You need to look at things a little bit pessimistic because you're looking for conflicts and other things that you need to resolve. And I'm telling you right now, there are so many bad trees out there on Ancestry and other places where people grabbed information thinking it was their ancestor and they were wrong. Caution is important here. Then I had the opportunity to go to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where I pulled the paperwork on that land entry file that I talked about earlier when he got the 160 acres in Chicago. That was only a few pages, but boy, was it gold. There was a letter from Carding stating how long he had been in Chicago. Super helpful. So exciting to read something in my ancestor's hand, my fourth great grandfather's hand, holding the actual paper that he wrote it on, because these are the originals. Seeing his signature, oh my gosh, it was so amazing. But one other person testified that carding had been there for as long as he had, and it was Orrin Jackson. Now that leads me to the next thing that I really needed to be paying attention to, and this is actually part of the earlier steps. It's something that you need to be watching as you're looking at census records and you're looking at other records. You need to be paying attention to the FAN group. Now, Elizabeth Schoen Mills kind of tagged that. It stands for Friends, Associates, and Neighbors. And those are the people that may link you to the person that you're researching. And when all else fails, sometimes they will direct you to that person. So if I'm looking at the people that Carding lived around, that maybe moved with him from New York to Chicago, or things like that, if I can find out where they lived in Vermont, maybe they were buddies and they moved to New York together. Do you understand how that can be so important? In this case, it didn't pay off a lot, but I did have a couple of individuals that were of interest to me in my fan group. I found a Comfort Jackson who was enumerated in the same town in New York as Carding was, and he was born before 1775 and 1820, so he could have been Carding's father. Comfort, Carding, maybe, but that's all I had. And then in those deeds, I found that Carding bought land in Broome County, and the land purchase was witnessed by an Abel W. Jackson and an Abner Jackson. Okay, those are Jacksons I care about. And then that Orrin Jackson that helped him get the land that I found at the National Archives. And then Carding and his wife later conveyed some land to Orrin Jackson. I don't have any record of Orrin being his son, so who's Orrin? So now I need to look into some of these other individuals that are crossing paths with Carding. First, I'm going to look at the people with the same surname, because they are probably some sort of relation to him. They may be a cousin, they may be an uncle, I don't know, but I need to look at those names and I need to start researching them. And I'm not going to dive as deeply into them at this juncture as I did with Carding, but I still want to see what I can find out about them. And if I strike out with them, I'm going to look at some of the other people that aren't by the surname of Jackson and see if I can find maybe somebody that lived in New York that then lived in Illinois, right near Carding. I can do tables and analysis and all sorts of crazy things to try to figure out if I'm seeing any relationships there, or somebody that was from Vermont who then moved to New York at the same time Carding. That may be even better. And if I can pinpoint more carefully where they were from in Vermont. Do you see what I'm talking about? Sometimes these people can be helpful. But at this point, I really hadn't found a lot. I had found that Abner Jackson was enumerated in 1810 in Pittsford, Rutland County, Vermont. Okay, so that's my only thing that really put me in Vermont that I was really excited about. Abel Jackson His 1850 census says he was born in Vermont, but he was first enumerated in Lisle, Broome County, and I couldn't find any other more specific location for him in Vermont. Orrin Jackson was first enumerated in 1840 in Illinois, but he was enumerated in 1830 in Tioga County, New York, which, by the way, is an adjacent county to Broome County, where Carding lived. So that's interesting. I see them moving, so Orrin is making more sense to me, and he's the one that testified that Carding should get the land. So Orrin is important to me. Comfort Jackson was kind of a bomb. He was born in Connecticut, lived in New York, and died in Chenango County, New York, which is also one of the bordering counties to Broome County, New York. But I didn't find him ever in Vermont. So could he have still been a father for Carding? Possibly, but I think I would have found him somewhere in Vermont around the 1790 census shortly after Carding was born, and I wasn't. So at this point, I'm a little bit closer, but I'm still not terribly closer to finding his father other than Pittsford, Rutland County, Vermont. And that's when I had a break. The next step really needs to be, and this can be part of your earlier steps too, but you've really got to make a separate focus on trying to determine their earliest record. And it may be a census record. So that census, our first census record was in New York, doesn't help me in Vermont. So I'm looking to see if I can find another record that is an earlier record that may be a record in Vermont. Now, birth records at this time period, for the most part, didn't exist. In some places they did, but they're really spotty. And there really wasn't a lot of birth records kept. Birth records in the United States really weren't kept until 1919, way later than this. You might find some in Boston and other places, but it's really hit and miss. You might find some church baptismal records, but again, that's kind of hit and miss too. And at this point, I hadn't found anything for Carding. So I'm really diving into his marriage record. I know the name of his wife. I'm looking for his marriage record, and I'd been looking for a long time, but I had not been able to find it. It wasn't in any of the online databases when I was doing my earlier research. And part of the reason is Vermont keeps a lot of their records on the township level, not the county level. And that's a mistake that a lot of us make. We research in states in a way that we might research in other states that could be very successful, and find that it's not. In most other states, particularly the younger states, they do keep those records on the county level. But in New York and Vermont, they kept them on the township level, which makes it so much harder to search because I don't know what townships they're from. And that's when something broke. I had the marriage record pop in Ancestry. Ancestry put up this record of a Corden Jackson and Betsy Gibbs in Pittsford, Rutland, Vermont. This was breaking. Now, Carding, this isn't obviously an original record. So was it transcribed incorrectly? Was the name a little bit different? I don't know. You know what I mean? At this point, it's hard to tell. I would really like to get the original record to see if maybe it was indexed incorrectly or transcribed incorrectly. But you got to hold on for that one. I also needed to make sure that it really was Betsy Elizabeth Gibbs. And I really wasn't positive yet about that because the only source that I had was this family history. So I researched their children, and through their children, I confirmed through a newspaper article announcing the marriage of one of their daughters, an obituary, and a death certificate that all stated that their mom was Betsy Gibbs. So I had more confidence that her surname truly was Gibbs. So now I have this record in Pittsford, Rutland County, Vermont. And now I'm starting to narrow down my research. That's where I want to go next. So now I'm going to really dive down into this earliest known or believed to be known location. And I've done a whole nother video on researching in the 1700s and early 1800s, which goes into this in more depth. I'll put a link to that after this video. Check that out. Even if you've seen it before, you may want to revisit it now after having watched this video. But I went through the process of identifying potential fathers in that area of Vermont to see if I could determine who Carding's father was. And I'm starting again with census records. I'm looking at the 1790, which is the earliest census, 1800, 1810, and 1820. By 1820, I know Carding's gone. So I'm kind of really narrowing it down to those few decades. Now, in 1790, there were 18 Jacksons in Vermont, 11 of which were in Rutland. That's quite a few. In 1800, there were 29 in Vermont, 11 in Rutland. In 1810, there were 39 Jacksons in Vermont, 11 in Rutland. So that number hasn't changed very much. In 1820, there were 89 Jacksons in Vermont and 17 were now in Rutland. Now, this is the census evaluation that I did of the various Jacksons that I was finding in Vermont. And you can see where they transfer over during certain years and where they don't. And at that point, Abraham was looking kind of promising because he had a child of the age of carting, and he was in Rutland, Vermont. He was in a different township, but just because he was in a different township doesn't concern me, because a lot of times people would go marry in the place where the bride was from because they frequently married in the bride's home. And you can see there's a lot of work here in this spreadsheet. And I have a number of individuals who are potential parents. So here's a timeline that I created for carting to help me just keep track of things and keep my head on straight. And the gray lines are county information, because this is really important, because records are generally held in the counties in which they were created. And so you want to be paying attention to when was there a change, because sometimes we think that somebody was in a particular county, but they lived there before that county was even created or that township was even created. And so you need to look earlier to see if you can find information about what it was before that time. So I've noted here that in 1781, Rutland County was created. Carting was born in 1789. Broome County, New York was created in 1806, and Carting doesn't show up there until 1820. Now I've added in the marriage of Carting and Pittsford, Rutland County, Vermont in 1814. You see how I'm just working to keep track of the various facts that I had found at this point. Now I also created this research calendar or research log, where I went through and documented a lot of the information that I had found. Now, I gotta be honest with you. If I'm doing a client project, a research log is really important. But when you're doing your own research, it's kind of up to you. And this is why. The one thing that scares me about research logs is if you think that you've looked somewhere and maybe they have something new. Maybe a library got in some new documents. Maybe Ancestry now has new record groups. And if you don't look because you're like, I've looked there before, that can actually hurt you. If I had written off Ancestry, I wouldn't have found that marriage record that I found. So sometimes it's really important to keep track of what you're doing. But sometimes I want you to open your mind and think about what may have hit since then, all right? Because right now, things are changing all the time. I made this document as well because I had found the Rutland Weekly Herald. And I put this information in here, all of the Jacksons and Gibbs that I could find, and the different articles and things that talked about them, hoping I could find something that tied me, but I didn't find anything. I'm still not finding definitive proof of the father of Carting Jackson. So now I'm diving into all of the records in that county. I'm looking at deeds, I'm looking at probate records, and I'm getting to know all of the Jacksons that live there, which is a really important thing. I want to kind of become the expert on the Jacksons in this particular location so that I can start putting families together and recognizing that if so-and-so had 3 boys in his household and I've named all those boys, then he's probably not my guy's father. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just really looking at all of these different people. And I had a couple potential candidates, but I still didn't have anybody narrowed down for certain. I do find information about a Carting P. Jackson who died when he was just 3 years old in 1837. He's the son of Francis and Louisa Jackson. And so Francis is now one of my fan group, right? Because he's got a son that's named the same name as my Carting, and it's an unusual name. So that's kind of interesting to me. I do more research on Francis, and I find out that Francis is the son of David Jackson. So now David is of more interest to me, and I continue to research these people, but I've still not found anything definitive. I've looked at deeds, I've looked at probate records. David Jackson has no probate record. So I'm just striking out. And it's difficult because there are multiple townships in Rutland County, Vermont. Some of the records are held on the county level and some of the records are held on the township level. And some of them are protected on Family Search and I have to go into a Family Search library to look at them, and some of them aren't. And I got to be honest with you guys, you can tell this has been taking me decades. So I'd go through it a period of time and I'd work on this really hard. And then I'd leave myself some notes on what I wanted to do next. And I would take a break because I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I needed to work on somebody else, which is totally fine. Don't ever feel like you have to figure it all out at once. A lot of times these brick walls are going to take a while to come down. One of the other interesting things about Francis W. Jackson is the 1850 census said he was a blacksmith. And one of the articles that I had read in the history of Broome County said that Carding was a blacksmith. So that was another tie I had between these two men. But I hadn't been able to find out anything else. Francis never went to New York and he never went to Chicago. Huh. Now, the 1790 census tells you nothing about children in the family, really. It just tells you how many males are over the age of 16 and gives you the names of people that resided in an area. The 1800 census, though, does tell you how many children are in a household, male and female, and their ages and things like that. So I start looking at that information. And that David Jackson, the father of Francis, in 1800, before Francis was even born, had a couple of sons the age that Carding would have been at the time. So David now is of more interest to me, but I still don't have any proof. Now, I got lucky. I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. Sometimes we don't get quite that lucky, and we have to write some kind of a proof argument where we kind of rule out everything else by being those pessimists and kind of looking for other options. And then we can kind of confidently say that I believe, like in this instance, David Jackson to be the father of Carding because I've ruled out all of the other Jacksons in the area, all of this other reasoning that can help you by combining a bunch of different facts, analyze that information, and come up with some reasonable conclusions. It's not definitive, but it's a reasonable conclusion. And that's okay if that's what you do. But like I said before, I got lucky. I took a trip. To Boston and to Vermont with my husband. He was there for business, and I went with him. And I went to the wonderful library of American Ancestors in Boston. And there I found a book. I found a beautiful book, a book that I loved. I found The Early Families of Rutland, Vermont by Don Hance. I love this book because all of a sudden I found a page in there that said Carding was the son of David Jackson. And it gave a baptismal date, which is interesting because it was 20 years almost after he was born. Maybe it was a full 20 years after he was born. Now, is that unheard of? No, people can get baptized later in life. But that was an interesting point, something I kind of needed to think about. But unfortunately, there was no sources as to where that information came from. This also said that Francis was the son of David. But I didn't know where this information came from. She had a bibliography where she had a number of interesting places where she'd gotten her information, but that's a lot of research for me to look through all of those. So I tried to find Don, and Don had passed away. And so then I reached out to local historical and genealogical societies because this book was published by the Rutland Historical Society. And I was going to Vermont and I was going to do this research in person. And I went to Pittsford Township and I tried to find the original copy of the marriage record of Corden and Betsy Gibbs, but all they had was the card that is viewable on Ancestry. So that was a strikeout. Those original records were probably destroyed long ago. And then I reached out to the Rutland Historical Society. I met some of the nicest people while doing my research there. And I've done another video where I talk about how important it is to reach out to these local people because they have information that you are not aware of because they know their area. They know what records. And I'm talking to them. I actually go and visit them in person. But as I'm talking to them, she said, "Did you check our baptismal records on our website?" Well, no. Did I do that? No, I didn't do that. And to be honest, when I go back to their website, it's hard for me to find these baptismal records. Maybe it's just my lack of an ability to look. But a lot of these local societies can be a little bit more difficult to navigate. And so it's so good to talk to them, either through email or give them a call and see if they can help you out. Well, sure enough, I find the baptismal record of Carding and with his father. Now, Francis wasn't baptized because he wasn't even born yet when this family was baptized. And Carding was older, but it looked like the whole family joined this church and they were all baptized on the same date. Now I have some awesome proof. I'm not finding any other records because I've done reasonably exhaustive research. I have not found any other records of another carding in Vermont. So I can be pretty confident that this one is my guy, and that's his dad and his mom. So we have to weigh the evidence that we have. We have to put it all together and look for problems. Look for interesting coincidences that aren't coincidences. We need to look for members of that fan group. We need to look for things in a timeline, make sure things are lining up. And as we do that, things will start to fall in place. And as we reach out to the people that can help us, we can find what we want to find. And I now comfortably say that my fourth great grandfather, Carding Jackson, was the son of David Jackson, who died, by the way, on the way home from military service in 1814. So Carding was still relatively young when his father passed away. So what are important steps that we need to be thinking about as we're trying to break down our own brick walls? We want to break it into manageable bites, not try to bite off too much. Just focus on one little record group, one little thing that you want to do at a particular time. We need to track them over time and use timelines. They are very valuable. We need to search thoroughly where you know they were for hints. We need to pay attention to that fan group. We need to search for those earliest records and try to pinpoint them in the place of birth. Often that's going to be a marriage record or an earlier census record. We need to become an expert on that surname in that area and then test out different parental possibilities. You need to know all the players and put those families together. And then you need to use those local resources because at this time period, it's not all going to be found on a site like Ancestry or Family Search. Oftentimes, the keys to our discoveries are going to be found elsewhere. Now, what didn't work? What mistakes did I make? I didn't find a probate record for David. Now, there may be some probate records somewhere that I missed, but that's a terrific record group. But in my instance, it just didn't pay off for me. So that wasn't totally my mistake. But the mistake that I did make is that I looked for land records in Rutland County. I didn't look in Rutland Township. And guess what I found in Rutland Township? I found some deeds where Carding bought and sold land. That also put him in that location. Now that record group was locked on Family Search and I had to go to a Family Search library to view it. So take the time and do that. And I just never did. My mistake. And then the other thing that I didn't do is I didn't look as thoroughly as I thought I did. Because that baptismal record actually has been uploaded to Internet Archive. It's hard to find, right? But it's there. And that was done by the Historical Society. And I hadn't reached out to the Historical Society until just recently. And I've been working on this guy for years. So my bad. So key takeaways. Don't trust unsourced trees. And be careful even if you trust source trees, because they may have grabbed information that is incorrect and they may have built their trees incorrectly. Don't perpetuate problems. Do the research yourself. If you're looking at this video, you're that interested. Secondly, I really want you to think about the other people that can be helping you that maybe you're not taking the time to contact. And finally, new records are breaking all the time. Don't give up. A new record could pop that could help your family history in a way that you didn't even expect. And with new technology like full text searching, we are finding so many records now that were so difficult to find in the past. So I encourage you, if you have an ancestor born between 1800, this strategy can work for you. And if you have one of those brick walls, put it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And if you've been able to solve one, I'd love to hear how you solved your brick wall. That would be fantastic. This video right here is that video that I promised on that early American research in the 1700s and early 1800s. I've also attached a link to subscribe to my channel so that you can be notified and I'll pop up in your feeds if you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn more from me. I wish you the best of success as you're researching your families and trying to break through your own brick walls, because it is a wonderful feeling when you do.